Hello, everybody. Good evening and welcome out there. Thank you for joining us for another one of our live stream virtual tours. And I'm delighted to welcome along our guest tonight, Mr. Benjamin Graham. Ben, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. And for anyone who's joining us, if you've been here before, you'll know the score. We sort of walk you through some images from a particular location with one of our guides, and they give their expertise and they get to talk to you about some of the images and photographic techniques, etc. And so we'll be doing that through Slovenia, which is a wonderfully versatile place to photograph. And we're going to see that through some of the images, and we've got lakes, we've got mountains, we've got waterfalls, we've got little details, we've got all sorts of things. And as ever, it's great for you to let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Give the post a like as well, that's fab. And if you have any questions at all throughout the course of the evening, I shall do my best to pick those up. Just drop them in the comments. And finally, before we get into it, we'll be doing a few of our little polls tonight as well, just to have a little bit of fun and get some questions going and a little bit of interaction with you out there, wherever you might be. And so welcome along as per usual. Now, let's get into it, Ben, and just a little bit of background about where Slovenia is and how it is shooting in Slovenia, what the country itself is like to visit, if we can.
Well, as you've already said, it's incredibly versatile because you've got this combination of like Snowdonia and the forest of Dean, and you've got castles as well. You've got some really beautiful old ecclesiastical structures that are quite magical, and generally they live in their own spaces. They're not terribly overcrowded by older or even modern structures. So there are plenty of photo opportunities out there, massive variety of stuff to shoot. And it's a really easy country to get around because the infrastructure is good and the road system is generally good and the people are wonderful. And I think it's just under 2 hours from Gatwick, so it's really easy to get to in terms of a flight.
Cool. And we can see it's just, we've got a little map up for anyone who doesn't know, nestled away there in a rather beautiful part of the world at the end of a couple of mountain ranges. And actually, we're going to kick off our first poll for the evening. We're interested if any of you have been out to Slovenia before. So if you're watching live and on certain devices, the poll will just pop up in front of your video there, and you can click yes or no to the question. If you're watching on catch up, I'm afraid we won't be seeing your answer, but we'll give you a few seconds to send in your answers there. But let's get into our first location within Slovenia, Ben, and Lake Bled. And I must say, actually, horrifically, I have been ignorant to Slovenia despite my trips to very close parts of Europe. But Lake Bled is somewhere even I know of and I'm kind of aware of. But tell us a little bit more about it and about what it offers photographically.
Well, first of all, Bled is the town that's our jumping off point at the start of the tour, because the hotel is literally 10 minutes walk from this view. No trip to Slovenia would be complete without this view either, because it's the most magical and beautiful little church. It's the Church of the Assumption of Santa Maria on Bled Island. And what generally happens is, because it is so beautiful and so picturesque, most of the group tend to want to shoot it every single morning at dawn, because every day presents different photo opportunities with it. And on this particular occasion, as you can see, I was really lucky with the mountain mist that dropped down on that day. In fact, the rains were coming in. I'm not sure whether that's cloud or fog, but probably a meteorologist out there will tell me. But that was shot about 5:30, 5:45 in the morning, and as I say, literally a 10-minute walk from the hotel. But you can get several different views of that church and the other buildings around the lake, which many of which are equally beautiful. And the furthest one is about a 10-minute drive in the minibus.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things to pick up on. Whenever you're around water, it's great, isn't it? Because the conditions can change day to day, hour to hour even. So I would imagine even throughout the course of a day, you might get a variety of opportunities.
Absolutely, and I can only imagine it's generally a very humid country because it has something like 300 lakes in it, and it's heavily forested. I think it's about 65 or 70% forest, so there's a high level of humidity there. So you've got a good chance of catching mist, particularly in the autumn, which is when we visit.
Yeah. And I'm just going to quickly mention about the poll. Thank you for those of you who've voted on that first one. 61% of you viewing have not been to Slovenia, but 39% of you have. So that's probably more than I expected, actually. So thank you for taking part. We've got a couple more later on. It's always good to have a little bit of interaction. I'm going to just say hello to everyone because we've got a lot of people coming in from joining us. Bulgaria, Inverness, Cerne Abbas, literally up the road from me, Cape Town, Northumberland, Bournemouth. South Coast are doing well here, Ben. And actually, no doubt we're going to talk about South Coast. A lot of people who may have seen your work, obviously former winner of Landscape Photographer of the Year, everybody, Mr. Benjamin Graham, with a very beautiful coastal shot. And I think a lot of people who do know your work might associate it with a certain look and the certain colors and the times of day that you like to be out. And we might explore that a little bit later on, but I wanted to just move us to this image because it's quite a contrast to the first very calm, still, steely gray sort of image we had, obviously conditions dependent. But when you do get this amazing light with water and reflections, it can give you a great deal to play with, right?
Absolutely. Well, the previous image was it was complete cloud cover, so we had very soft, very flat, very pale grey light, and I was just lucky that I got that fog rolling down over the hillside from the mountains. But again, here we've got a little bit of humidity, as you can tell, in the air. It is very, very slightly misty, but on this day the sun is breaking through on the right hand side of the image and just gently touching all of those beautiful deciduous trees on the northern shore of Lake Bled. And I can't remember the name of the other church over there. It'll come to me in a minute. But there's a boardwalk that runs all the way along the south and the eastern edge of the lake that you can quite easily set tripods up on. So it's quite well served for photographers who want to do this kind of early morning shot.
And at the time of year you're going, it's October, so it's autumnal, and we're catching some of that beautiful colour, and we're going to see even more of that later. So I would imagine it's for someone who primarily enjoys working in colour. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. I'm a proper colour monkey.
and you love these early hours, right? Because of the.
I do. They're my favourite time, and of course I only live 10 minutes from the south coast, and my favorite time of day is that sort of hour and a bit before dawn and the sort of 15 minutes after dawn as the sun breaks the horizon. As a general rule, I've mostly lost interest, but not always. Sometimes I can get great shots after that time. And of course, living by the coast with the vast expanses of wet sand and looking out over into the sea, it gives you the opportunity to create high key images. I think it's just a corollary of living on the coast that it suits that kind of photography.
Yeah. And if I can just actually pick you up on just a little composition thing here, it's nice to play with that reflection, right? And the keeping the shoreline central here. This mirroring effect is a nice thing to play with water.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a time when you can definitely and almost always actually get away with a bifurcated horizon and split the photograph exactly 50-50. I find it works. Some people prefer to shift the central division down by 30% or up 30%, but as a general rule, I find it works with a perfect reflection like that.
Yeah, and I love the way the light is being introduced into the right hand side, but you're not murdering our eyeballs with it, which I very much appreciate.
Ah, well, Mother Nature did that.
Good man. All right. Well, we're going to actually pick up on one of the views from actually that scene that we've been looking at, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. And as I've said earlier, and I know a few people are joining us later on, and that's how these things work. If you do have any questions for Ben about photography related, Slovenia related, any of the particular images, do pop them in the comments, and I will try and keep my eye on that as we go along. I really wanted us to talk a little bit about this because what we've dealt with so far has been, very classical in the views we've been looking at, and obviously it's a beautiful location. And however, there are times when, sometimes we've seen that and we've played with that composition, or the light might be doing something different, or we feel we want to react differently and uniquely or in a different creative way to the scene in front of us. And this one I love because of the sort of mist coming up here off the bottom, and obviously we're playing with a reflection. So maybe can you just expand a little bit on that sort of thought process about how to attune your eyes to looking for different sorts of compositions when there is really an obvious one there, but you may want to come away with something a little different?
Yeah, sure. There's a couple of reasons why I ended up with this image. Firstly, I do, as a general rule, tend to look down onto the surface of the water and pick out reflections. I'm always on the lookout for a different way to photograph something that I photographed before. And as you can imagine, I've been to and obviously it never disappoints, this Church of the Assumption of Santa Maria in the middle of Lake Bled. But on this particular morning, the sky was quite contrary. And when I took a conventional image looking straight at the church, no matter how close I cropped it to the top of the spire, I still had these rather intrusive contrails from aeroplanes. And then I looked at the reflection, I realized with the mist rising slightly from the surface of the lake, this is early in the morning again, by the way, I could get this reflection shot. And that's how I arrived at that one. I think it would have worked even actually without the mist, but the mist made it quite a special reflection.
Yeah, I think that's what sets it out as well, doesn't it? It sort of gives a little veiled cushion at the bottom of the frame, and I would imagine, again, but like we said earlier on, when you are in and around water, there can be great things to play with in terms of mist and everything else. So it's a good tip, everybody. Look up, look down, look left, look right. Do your rain dance, whatever it is that turns you on. Okay, well, we're going to just move on because I wanted to show everyone this fantastic castle, which is perched atop, and we're going to look actually from the view from there as well in a moment. So just tell us a little bit more, because there's obviously some artificial lighting here, and we can maybe discuss the time of day. So yeah, explain what's going on here.
First of all, I can't remember the time of day, and yes, there is some artificial lighting because it's all artificial. So the rock face is illuminated with kind of bluey green white light, and the castle itself is flooded at night time with these orange neon lights. But I really liked the way that all the light was emerging from the middle of the image and radiating out, and there's no light in the sky around it. I just have to try and find out what time that was.
That's okay. I'll let you do that. Actually,
that was quarter to 6 in the morning. I've just checked on the EXIF data. So I probably only took about 3 people out with me, I think, on that morning, but they all got images like this and were really delighted with them. It was another one of those days where we had the mountain mist descending.
Yeah, and it gives it that kind of slightly spooky, kind of semi-expect Dracula to come falling out of there, but maybe
it is very like that. It's like it's a proper little fairy tale castle, and we do always make a point of visiting that on the last day before we take the minibus back to the airport. So we have a very leisurely time in the morning from up there, and the views are spectacular.
Okay, so you can get in and have a look around then, yeah?
Oh yeah, the whole place is open to the public. It's a fabulous little castle.
Well, let's have a little look at the view from the top. And I was really keen to put this one in. So a little bit of background. Often we talk to the photographers and I say to them, send me a load of pics, and then we pick a few out and we curate down, shall we say, from a number. And I like to pick out things which I think sometimes are a little different as well. And for me, just this colour was just, you know, amazing. And I would imagine if it's like that as it is, that's quite a thing to see from up there. But it could be
Yeah,
quite
I can't. Sorry, Sam, go on.
no, it's quite a thing to deal with, just a mass expanse, you know. How do you do, you know, that simplicity and knowing exactly where to let this be and everything else? But tell us about this view down from the top.
Well, I've got to tell you that wasn't the only boat down there, because there's quite a lot of maritime traffic on the surface of the lake on a day like this, because a lot of these boats are rowed out by people being paid by tourists to take them to the Church of the Assumption. So you get quite a lot of rowboats, and you also get quite a lot of pleasure boats with canopies on top that take 30 or 40 people to the island as well. And I just happened to spot this one boat rowing into this beautiful expanse of water. And make no mistake, Slovenia is absolutely spotless. Their water is crystal clear. You know, you're not going to see a shopping trolley in Lake Bled and a car tire and a load of beer cans. It really is a spotlessly clean country. But I just like the way this tiny boat was just appeared in this huge expanse of azure water. And that was shot from the battlements of the castle that we just saw in the previous image.
Okay, so maybe up the top there with a nice, you know, telephoto lens, it's a great way to...
I think I used my 7200 for that one.
Yeah, so picking out some detail. I think really what helps, and the question, I'm going to pick up on a question in a second, but these little kind of buoys, aren't they? Just gives us that diagonal line, just gives it a little something to anchor against here, which I really like as well. But for the colour, I think is something you'd have to be really careful not to fiddle with, and just, you know what I'm saying, the getting the white balance right is important there as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there was a quick questions coming from Ralph. Thank you, Ralph. What are temperatures like at that time of year, I would imagine?
Very civilized, Ralph, actually. I don't think the temperature during the daytime ever dropped below about 15 or 16, and generally about 20 degrees. I wrote to everybody in the group before we went out last year, because I made a point of checking up on the weather forecast, and the forecast was for it to be around about 20 all week. That was last year.
Yeah, civilized indeed. And this is, we're talking October, so 15th to 19th of October is the next one in 2021.
Yeah.
So yeah,
you have to remember that sorry, Sam. Yeah.
No, go for it.
You have to remember that it is mountainous, and so the weather can close in, so temperatures can drop a little bit, like they can here, of course, but they can get a bit severe. But I would say October is a good time to go, because it's not going to be fiercely hot, and it's not going to be horrifically cold either. You get those lovely autumn colours too.
Yes, and we're going to see a little bit of that as we go on. And I mean, I would imagine Slovenia is becoming more and more popular tourist-wise, but October, I would imagine it's still moderately quiet, depending on where you go.
Well, that's the thing. So we stay in an area of outstanding natural beauty in the middle of a national park. So it tends to attract quite a lot of tourists, but I do recommend people get up super early and get their shots of the honeypot locations really early, so we don't run into hordes of people. And that has worked both times that we've been there. We rarely see, we see a few other photographers, but not many. And this shot that you've just pulled up here is an example of going to a location well before dawn, before the coaches arrive and all the tourists turn up and flood the cafes and walk over the bridges and around the perimeter of the lake. Shall I say a bit about this one, or did you want to introduce?
No, go for it, and then we'll pick up on a couple of points.
This is the church. I think it's the Church of St. Christopher on the banks of Lake Bahingay, which is only a 20-minute drive from Bled, where we stay in our hotel. And we arrived there this morning, and the fog was so thick that the members of the group were actually a bit concerned about the sort of photography they were going to be able to acquire. But in the end, I managed to get them all really into it, and we got these fabulous shots of these ghostly shapes of the church spire and the jetties and the tiny little boat huts on the edge of the lake. And this particular one happens to be one of my favorites that I shot when I was there with them.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about the conditions and the fog. Like you, when I see those sorts of conditions, I get actually really excited. But I know it can feel a little overwhelming because you're not quite sure what you can do with it. But I suppose it's just about matching the conditions with the mood of the location, right? And you mentioned having a church like this next to this beautiful sort of bridge. You know, that's not a it's got a vibe, is what I'm saying. It's like vaguely Gothic sort of thing
Yes.
going on.
Yeah, yeah, and the other advantage is that the water of the lake was like a mirror, so it was completely flat because there was zero wind because the fog was so super thick. It was a question of getting into a position to take advantage of the architectural features that we had and the surface of the water that we were given. And I think everybody came away really happy that they'd got shots that weren't just a standard postcard picture of the church with a blue sky behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. A quick question has come in, and then I'm going to move us to the next image, which actually has a very similar feel in lots of ways because of the conditions. So maybe I'll flick it over, and then I'll ask the question,
Oh yes,
which
okay.
is from Lorraine. So, do you take your high key images in camera or post processing? So, I suppose it's to do with these sorts of shots. Are you exposing quite a lot to the right, or is that something you're bringing in after?
Yes, I will. Given the opportunity, I will expose as far to the right as possible. It's a question of knowing your camera gear inside out and back to front, because sometimes you need to expose to the left. There's no way around it. But in conditions like this, for example, the one we're looking at now and the previous one, you can quite comfortably expose to the right on my camera by about a stop and a third, probably, which gives you a very high key image that you can play with. I shoot raw, like everybody else I expect who's listening in, and it allows me to tweak them slightly. But as a general rule, coming out of camera, they're all quite well exposed to the right, especially all of my seaside stuff at the moment, because I can't remember exactly what position the sun was in for this shot we're looking at. But if I go down the beach in the morning here now on the south coast, the sun is so far north, I'm virtually shooting at 180 degrees to it. Sometimes I can go almost 2 stops over to the right without blowing the highlights. And that's how I can acquire a lot of my high key stuff. But yes, there are circumstances when you do need to expose to the left and then pull it back a bit in post.
Okay, yeah, great. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this image because I really love this one because it's a great example of letting something be subtle, a bit like the image before as well, and not trying to shove a load of things into it when actually it just wants to breathe and be gentle and be subtle. But it seems to me, I would imagine, and I'm just going to flick my mouse in, try not to do that too much, but it looks like this is rain here on this little curve in the
Correct.
water.
Yeah. Yeah. We had fog and mist and torrential rain, and I had the camera in a plastic bag to take that one. But like you, those kind of conditions do sometimes create really magical opportunities. And of course, with those lovely fall colors in the trees, it's really helped with that mid-ground interest.
Yeah, and just diffusing that background, which those could be quite. It looks like there's a couple of fairly big, heavy peaks, hillsides on the left there, and
Yeah, there's the mountain ranges come almost to the edge of Lake Bahingay. It's a really stunning location.
yeah, cool. Well, we like that one. There's a question, Ben, which is, and I'm just going to make sure I get this right. This is from Joaquim, I think. Did you add brackets or remove a bit of haze in processing? And I wonder if he means the dehaze slider or if he means physical haze.
Yeah, my advice is to stay away from dehaze and clarity. I never use either of them. Uh, I don't really find them useful. I might very, very rarely, maybe 1 in 100 pictures, I might give 10% clarity on something just because I want to sharpen up a tiny element of foreground. But as a general rule, I find that those options in either Camera Raw or Lightroom or whatever program you're using, they do tend to interfere with the transition zones between the light and dark areas of the pictures, and they can make them quite easily very crunchy. And when you go in and have a good look, I generally find that it was a mistake to use either of those. So the short answer is no. The long answer is no, I tend not to use any of those kind of things.
Okay. Hopefully, Joaquin, that was the angle. I put a
Yes,
spin
thank
on
you,
that. So
Joaquin.
yeah, I hope I got that right. I've just put up a little poll because just as a little interesting one, what sort of condition? So ideal world, you go out with your camera. I know it might depend on the location, but I can't. Bear with me. What sort of conditions do you prefer? Mist and calm, as we've been seeing here, or stormy and dramatic? You know, are you a prima donna or are you a thinker? That's the question, really. But let's move on because we're going from very calm, and obviously the poll is there for you if you're watching, and on certain devices if you're watching live. Color at this time of year is obviously a great draw to people, and it's probably another question for another day about why photographers are so enticed by autumnal color. What is it that really sets us off at that time of year? But here, this is really a beautiful, fiery, rusty display of autumnal color. And again, you know, using reflections and the trees that are there. So can you tell us a little bit more about the autumnal display in Slovenia?
Yes, well, it's completely staggering everywhere you go, and there are opportunities when we're in the minibus. This one is shot at Lake Bahinga again. These last few images that we've seen are all from the same location, and these beautiful broadleaf deciduous forests go right down to the edge of the water, and there are 2 or 3 really big ancient beech forests where you walk through this beautiful carpet of red beech leaves. Um, I think you may have kept one in the folder here for showing later on. And clearly there are pleasure boats like the same kind of thing that you get on Ullswater and the lake and the other lakes in the Lake District. And this one was shot late afternoon. This is not a morning shot, so I can't remember whether it was the same day as the previous one where we shot the church in the morning and the mist had cleared, or whether it was another day. Let's have a look. No, that was the same day as
Wow.
the day that we shot the church in the mist. So the winds presumably came in, I can't remember, but the sun's come out and it's illuminated these beautiful deciduous forests.
Yeah, that's amazing to know that the conditions can change that wildly in a day. So
Yeah, well, it's
those of you,
mountainous, so you've got to expect that kind of thing, really, haven't you?
yeah, and those of you that answered the poll, 60% of you prefer mist and calm, 40% of you stormy and dramatic. But suffice to say, 100% of you could be happy on a day in Slovenia because you're going to get all of that potentially in one session. See what I did there, Ben?
Quite likely.
Yeah.
Yes, it does happen.
It does happen, exactly. So it's quite nice that if you're thinking of going away at that time of year, you can still get your woodland or tunnel fix. And actually, at the back end of this talk, we've got some really beautiful woodland images that Ben's made, including a couple of different techniques that we're going to talk about as well. So do hang around for that. That's at the back end of our chat. I will keep us moving, Ben, just for time reasons, because we've got a nice number of images to get through tonight. I wanted to sort of transition into this. Into a few mountainous images. We've sort of alluded to the fact that obviously with mountain ranges comes different conditions and whatnot, but shooting these very dramatic looking, Alps looking jagged peaks is quite a nice change of pace from the genteel lakeside shooting as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually a roadside shot, so we are in the minibus. We're always prepared to stop if ever anybody sees something or we all see the same thing and we want to stop. So whenever it's safe and convenient, we will always stop at the side of the road and catch stuff like this. And this is the kind of thing that you get when you're just generally driving around in Slovenia. Really stunning views of these fantastic mountains. I can't remember, I think these are the ones that border Italy, or they could be the ones in central Slovenia. But either way, on this particular day, we did stop about half a dozen times, and I managed to get about 6 keepers, I think, but everybody in the bus was really happy with what we managed to achieve. And we didn't need to do any mountaineering in order to acquire these shots. That's the great thing about Slovenia. Everything's really local to where you are. Most of the things that we visit are about half an hour to 40 minutes. There's a couple of things that are a bit further away, and we'll come to them later in the talk. But this sort of scenery is around you all the time, every time you drive in Slovenia. It's stunning.
And we mentioned, when it can be very cloudy and sometimes it feels a little overcast, it actually can be a nice aesthetic to sort of play with. And I love the way there's just this beautiful line of the cloud straight through the middle there, because it helps us just differentiate, the planes that are going on visually. It gives an image some sort of depth and forward and back. I'm just wondering, obviously because it was quite overcast, was it fairly muted? We can see a little bit of color in the trees there, or have you desaturated a little, or was that as cool and sort of what I'm trying to say, colorless is not quite the right word, but you know what I'm angling at.
Yes, I may have desaturated that one very slightly.
Yeah, and that can be a nice thing to play with to give that kind of cool look, can't it? Without it going blue.
Yeah, you've got to be quite careful, obviously, but this one is definitely blue on this occasion. So the previous one desaturated. This one, I've taken most of the yellow out. This was actually shot during blue hour.
Yeah, and I actually really enjoy the curves and the swerves and the sways and the feeling of energy that you get from the water coming through. So as well as obviously the dramatic view behind Ben, was it a case of capturing that flow of the water and experimenting with shutter speeds perhaps to accentuate that?
Yes, I do. I'm with you. I do actually like the way that came out, but initially that wasn't what I was first drawn to. I really liked the shape of the island with the rocks on, and I liked the counterpoint of the big trees with trees on the right-hand side. And I like the way that the mountains in the background are compressed slightly, and I haven't got the ridge of the mountains. So I've got this complete block of rock with trees on that I've been able to compress the trees to. But primarily I was drawn to the shape of the island. And then when I shot it, it was it's a 15-second exposure. So I've got a little bit of movement there in the water. No filters on this one. It's just because the light levels are low and it is the blue hour.
Okay, yeah, so that's interesting. You don't always need ND filters depending on the prevailing light around, and so that blue can be found in the atmos at that feel. I mentioned to Ben when I first saw this that this is very reminiscent of northern Italy and the areas that I know very well. I travel, and you do see a lot of these big where the valleys come down, you see these big waterways, but I like just the differentiation between the light and the dark in the water. And it just helps us again find that little bit of depth, and you can find that if this was all just very bright, for example, it would feel a little more difficult perhaps on the eyes, but that's sometimes things you have to sort of play with while you're there. Is this, again, so you mentioned this was a fairly quick, easy one to get to, Ben?
Yeah, this is very easy to get to. We'd actually just come back. We're on our way back from the waterfall that we've been shooting, and we've got images of the waterfall later in the talk if we have time to show them, but this was on the way back to the hotel. I'd seen it on the way up, and I knew that it would be a good place for us to all stop. And also, there's a cafe there. So when the light levels drop really low, we can get ourselves a cup of coffee on the way back.
It's all coming out now.
And it's actually Italy. You're right, Sam. This is the Slovenian-Italian border.
The border, yeah.
Those I think those are Italian mountains.
I recognise an Italian mountain when I see one. Now, talking of mountains, I wanted to put this in because we talked earlier on about you being a bit of a color monkey, for want of a more preferable phrase. But there are times when you will embrace the black and white, and I really love the fact that we've got the three guests with us there down at the bottom. It gives a great idea of scale. But why or when might you think about black and white? As someone who primarily works in color, what makes the decision for you to think about things in black and white?
I generally, you've already indicated that I'm a really early morning person, and very often a late person as well, because I love to shoot the dawn and the pre-dawn and the twilight and the blue hour. What I tend to find is in the daytime, I've used a polarizer on this one, by the way. So this is my 50mm lens with a polarizer. And I find that all of my polarized shots during the daytime convert really well to black and white, because the polarizer darkens all the blue in the sky and makes the clouds look really three-dimensional, and it really suits the conversion to black and white. And when I haven't got the pinks and the oranges and the sort of salmon colors to play with, I feel that I produce something a bit different out of a daytime shot than I would otherwise acquire. I think it looks better than if the sky is blue and the clouds are white, but that's just my preference. And also, I wasn't sure about all the different colours of the jackets of the participants down the bottom there. I thought it was a bit of a distraction to have all the different colours. So they converted well to black and white too.
Okay, well, yeah, honesty is the best policy. Um, I I love this kind of scenery because as we've talked about, many themes are recurring here to do with light and
Yeah.
but dealing with bigger vistas like that can be harder sometimes, for people to kind of lock into the view there. So, any thoughts about finding compositions within quite dramatic and large scale things in front of you?
Well, as you know, I love to play around with the cloudscape, and I think when you live somewhere like the south coast, you don't have mountain ranges, so you don't have that background. And the thing that I'm always looking for is shape and balance. Obviously, I do love to shoot color, and I'm drawn to light. Light is the most important thing. But if I'm going out all the time when the light is good, then I make the assumption that the light's going to be great in the photograph. How am I going to build on that? And the best way is to build with, in my view, is to build with balance and shape, and to try and make all the pieces of the puzzle fit together so that the shapes and the textures and the sizes work as a group, as a cohesive group, like they're all sort of characters in a story relating to one another.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer, and that's always kind of what we're seeking to do, I suppose, is make that coherent whole, should we say. And I've put this one in after the mountain images because obviously there's amazing mountain backdrop behind, and we've got these lovely pinks coming in here, and this is quite a sort of traditional scene in certain parts of Europe around there. But you find these places sort of perched away, and you think, how the heck did anybody ever get there in the first place?
Exactly.
And this looks like one of those. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you do wonder where the congregants came from, because there's no settlement anywhere near it. It takes about 15 minutes to drive up to it in the minibus from the nearest village. So it must have taken them ages to get there. But it is such an incredibly picturesque little chapel, and the mountains in the background there, I think we're looking more or less northwest, I think. So this is probably might just about be the tail end of the Austrian Tyrol, and we're there at sunset for this shot, and the chapel actually gets better and better in my view as the twilight darkens, because these lights come on and illuminate it, and you get this lovely glow to the chapel, plus you get twilight skies. But any time of day, of course, it is beautiful, and you could shoot that in the middle of the day with a blue sky and fluffy clouds, and it would still look fabulous. The trick is getting there when there aren't that many people around, and the later you leave it, the fewer people there are. So that's what suited us on this occasion. We were there quite late, and there weren't that many people around.
So, as ever with landscape and outdoor photographers, patience is the key. Let the normal people go and do their thing, and they'll soon get tired. We've got to outlast them, everybody. That's what it comes down to. We wanted to put some of the waterfall images in because I know that's a trip out that you do on the tour, and we've got three from this location. And the one we wanted to start with is this image, which is a stitch. So a multiple stitch panorama. So just tell us a little bit about the technicals here, Benjamin, and why I suppose you chose to shoot it like that.
This one I shot on my recce tour with Sue Bishop, my co-leader, and I'd gone out with only my 50mm lens and my 70-200. I didn't take my wide angle as well, and I ended up making this one with a 21 shot stitch with my 50mm lens, and ended up being about 110 megapixels, I think. And it was the only way to get the whole thing in. But if you were going to show some of the detail shots, you can see that actually you don't need to get it in. Had I taken my super wide, my 14mm, I could have been able to get the whole thing in. And most people will carry a wide angle with them when we go out on the trip. So you no need to go as mad as I did with that huge stitch. But this is a really beautiful waterfall location that's way off the tourist track, and it takes about, I think it took us about an hour and a half to get there, and it was quite a long trip. But I think people were getting a bit worried about the length of time we'd spent in the minibus and not shot anything. But then when we got there and we saw this, it was all worthwhile because it's such a beautiful place. And these emerald and sort of peacocky and jade colors are all genuine. It's absolutely fantastic down there. It's a real fairy grotto.
Yeah, this color down here is absolutely gorgeous. That jade, I mean, you know, that is absolutely beautiful things to play with. And you know, whenever we're near moving water, as a lot of landscape and outdoor photographers just love being around moving water, and it's a bit like the autumnal color question. I don't know what it is that why does that grab us so much? Any ideas?
I tell you why.
Tell me.
It's because photographers can't wait for the autumn because they can't be bothered to get up for the dawn in the summer.
That's a naughty answer, but possibly true. But this with dealing with waterfalls, obviously, you know, long exposure sometimes, but again, depending on the amount of water coming down and the speed it's coming down and the prevailing light conditions, I would imagine this looks fairly dark around there generally. So is this the sort of shot where perhaps you don't need any ND at all, Ben?
I'm just having a look at the EXIF data, Sam, as you speak. It's a 1.3 second exposure, and that is I may have used a polarizer on that one to darken the green in the moss and the vegetation and the lichens on the rocks. But the sun is behind the hills, so we've got no direct sunlight falling on the water, which means it's a lot easier to control the highlights in the falling water. It's quite easy to blow your highlights when you're doing a reasonably long exposure of water falling in a waterfall. You wouldn't be able to do that with direct sunlight on it without doing multiple exposures. But yeah, that's about 1.3 seconds, which is just enough to give a bit of texture in the water without it being completely ghostly.
Yeah, and I'm just going to move us to the detail shot here, and I'm just going to say Ken asked a question there about what level of ND did you use, and the answer is none. In that, when it's quite dark like that, generally you don't even need to add an ND unless you're going for a super long exposure, right?
That's right. I think, to be honest, Ken, I left my polarizer on that shot, that last one. And the polarizer, of course, does give you 2 stops.
Yeah.
So without the polarizer, it would have been about, I don't know, what, a quarter of a second, something like that.
Yeah.
Put polarizer on, and I'm up to 1.6, 1.7 seconds.
So I wanted to just show this one because we've had a transition now from quite a wide shot and the mega stitch, the lunatic stitch, to the mid shot, which was a bit more classic. And now obviously we're dealing with a detail shot. So sometimes when you're faced with quite a broad scene like that, it can be quite nice to experiment with just picking out details. But how any advice for how you go about, where do you start? Which detail do you pick out? What are you looking for? Is it again that combination of shapes and energy that we talked about?
Yeah, what I was trying to do was trying to get the way the water entered the frame and hit the rocks into a kind of cohesive sort of pattern. And I did fire off quite a lot of shots. That one is actually, out of interest, that one is with my 200mm. So the best way, obviously, to isolate areas of the waterfall is to stick a longer lens on. Otherwise, you just end up cropping small areas of a file. So with my 200mm lens, I probably fired off maybe a dozen different images, trying with different shapes of the water. And that is the one that ended up being my favorite. I really like the way that the water completely fills the frame and you get this suggestion of the vegetation and the foliage and the rocks behind.
Yeah, and something we've talked about on here before is, you know, aspect ratios, and if something is physically coming down and it has a natural movement which is up to down, then probably thinking about it in a portrait frame is a good way to start as you're kind of working with that movement already.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm just going to keep us honest, Ben, time-wise. So we've got a couple of little detail shots that we wanted to get to, again, just to show some of the, you know, the different types of shooting options that are available in Slovenia. And this is within a sort of small gorge complex. Is that about right, Ben?
Yeah, Kransky Gorge is actually it's quite big. It's a national park area again, and you can walk from one end to the other, I suppose, in about, I think, 45 minutes, maybe an hour if you stroll. But the whole place is it's very easy to walk on because they supply boardwalks all the way through. It's a pretty spectacular gorge, but it's in my experience it's quite hard to translate the spectacular gorge into a spectacular photograph, and I've ended up several times shooting details in the gorge, and this is a 30-second exposure of the riverbed in the gorge, and just for me, Mother Nature has sprinkled these gold leaves on top of the rocks and on top of the moss to give it that lovely sparkle in the middle.
Yeah, and again, that's a great thing to play with when you've got moving water and you've got beautiful little adornments, for want of an even more sparkly word. That's a nice time to play with that as well. And I think looking for details generally can allow an element of abstraction and or sort of ambiguity. And I really like the way that you've done that in this shot. Again, I believe we're probably dealing with a reflection here, and we can kind of see that in the waviness. But is this a shoreline? This is presumably a shoreline of one of the lakes.
Yeah, this is Lake Bled. There are really beautiful varnished teak and beautifully gloss painted tourist boats with canvas canopies, and it's very hard not to shoot a kind of slightly obvious postcardy kind of image of them, where they're all moored up on the edge of the lake, like they're all parked. And again, I've used the reflection in the lake water, which is beautifully calm and hardly rippling at all, just to get this bow handle and the canopy of the next boat behind it.
Yeah, and like we've talked about, it's about interlocking elements, right? And do you find you just find peering into the camera sometimes for 20 minutes, sort of wrestling with keeping these things in the right place in the frame?
I do a lot of my sort of composition thinking without the camera, because I've kind of, my mind just thinks like that all the time now. I'm constantly thinking, how would I put all of this into a photograph wherever I am? But sometimes it helps just to put the camera up and just look through the viewfinder. I know that a lot of people now compose on screens, and if you find that works for you, then great. I know some people put their hands up like this and make a square, and that works for some people as well. You need to do whatever works for you, but I do find that pre-visualization is a really important element of finding things in a different way rather than shooting the obvious.
Yeah, and I think as we move on to the last sort of segment, we've got some really lovely woodland images, and again, the amount of variety we've got in the space of a few days, and in the space of a few miles in lots of cases, or tens of miles, and finding order in woodland scenery and pre-visualizing that structured order is something we're going to talk about a little bit over these few images, because there's some great examples of it. But this particular one, Ben, I wanted to talk about because it's the multiple exposure. So if we can first deal with what's actually going on in terms of the number of shots, and then actually why might you treat this or give this the multiple exposure treatment?
This is two images. This is not multiple exposure in camera. We're going to see the source file, the original source file for the tree in a moment, but this is, oh, there we go. So that's the shot from the shoreline of Lake Bohinge. And I was really drawn to this tree with its few remaining yellow leaves and the lovely trunk with the moss on, and also that kind of fading out, slightly misty, pale jade colored background I thought worked really well with the colors of the tree bark and also with the tree leaves. And I've overlaid an image of some rough blue, pale blue, turquoise and white paint over the top of the image of the tree, and used a blending mode, I can't remember which one, and then probably played slightly with the opacity. It's as simple as that. It's just a picture of paint laid over the top of the tree, inspired by the work of the amazing Glenys Garnett. And if you don't know Glenys's work, I recommend that you follow her. She's a photographic magician who works in a style like this. My stuff is nowhere near her standard, but I really enjoyed doing that. But actually the source file itself, I really like too.
And I've put a little poll up actually just asking if people out there have tried shooting multiple exposures, either in the field in your camera, and various modern day cameras, in fact even film cameras had the ability, you just couldn't see it, but either in the field with your camera or after the fact with software. And obviously it's something that has had a sort of renaissance, and I call it renaissance because, as I say, it had a kind of wave of its own in the film world many sort of decades ago, but it's something that I think a lot of people are finding is a way to add their own sort of creative stamp on a particular location, and or sort of exercise their own aesthetic. But it's not something to be scared of, I wouldn't say. It's something to play with, Ben, but it can be, at first you can not, it's about finding which bits match with which, either in the field or later on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a question of choosing color schemes that work together, patterns that work together. And also, a lot of the group were experimenting with intentional camera movement as well in the beech forest and the pine forest around Lake Bahenge, and getting some very successful images in the woodland using intentional camera movement and multiple exposure.
Yeah, and so yeah, absolutely. And woodland is a great place to play with it. And again, the poll is there for you. Anyone who's watching live, and on certain devices, it will show. Some it may not. I'm afraid that's Facebook, not me. But interestingly, so far, 56% of you have tried shooting multiple exposures. 44% of you haven't. So that would be something to go off and try. My next question should have been on the poll: how many of you found that successful? Or but we won't go to that. We'll save that for another day. What I am going to say, and there's a couple of nice comments coming in, particularly on this one, Ben, to do with the colors and how they work together. So there's some nice compliments.
Oh,
thank you everybody there. I'm going to just keep us moving again for time, and because this is a really beautiful shot for lots of reasons. We've got this band of color here from the fallen trees. And as we've talked about a couple of times now, that color is such a great motivator for us as photographers, especially at this time of year. But also this sort of shock of white in the mid sort of fore mid-ground, if you will, and what looks like a body of water behind it. So can you just explain to us, Ben, a little bit about what is going on in this particular location? I can see why you were attracted to it, but tell us the background.
Well, this is Lake Bahenge, and this is the edge of one of the beech forests that surrounds the lake. As I say, they all get this beautiful uninterrupted carpet of fallen ochre leaves. And then the edge of the lake also has this fantastic shelf of white pebbles that goes straight over to that beautiful pale jade water in the background, and it's slightly misty here, so you can't really see the mountainside as it cascades down into the water onto the opposite bank. But I just felt that those colors together, that triple color effect with the beech trunk and the leaves, worked really well in combination. There are so many photo opportunities there around the lake. You could honestly, you could spend the whole time there. The whole tour.
Well, we've talked about the variety, but yeah, having them all within shot, a mountain, a lake, a beach, a tree and autumnal colour. I kind of feel like you shouldn't be allowed, Ben. It doesn't seem right that you get that.
I know, and also to get that carpet of white pebbles as well. Yeah. So this is, I would say, probably a uniquely Slovenian location. I don't know. There might be another lake somewhere that has that kind of colour scheme with those white pebbles and with the beech trees, but I've never experienced it. So yeah, a stunning location.
Yeah, and that white absolutely does it all for various reasons, you know, to do with the color, the ambiguity, the spacing, everything. So no, I'm really happy we got that one in. And thank you everyone for following along with us. It's fab that we've had such great retention throughout this, which is always nice, that you're happy to sit and listen to me week after week. Poor sods. We've just got 3 or 4 images left, and really a couple of great ones that I wanted to make sure we had in, and we're doing okay for time. We've got 5 or 10 minutes left. This particular one is another, obviously, a kind of riotous celebration of colour. And I mentioned to you, I kind of see 2 figures a little bit with this one on the right, just slightly having a go at the one on the left, but finding order, in extremely chaotic situations is quite different to what you might normally do. We've mentioned your South Coast explorations, because obviously that's more local to you, with big skies, big open spaces, gentle colours. This is a totally different change of gear. So do you still get that buzz when you're wrestling with these sorts of scenarios?
Totally. This was a stop the minibus moment, because we were on our way from somewhere to somewhere. I can't remember where exactly we were going from and to, but the setting sun was striking this very steep hillside behind these gnarly old trees, but the gnarly old trees had just gone into shadow, so there was this beautiful golden light behind on the forest, with these lovely black silhouettes of these incredibly complicated shapes. And they were actually, these 2 trees were on the edge of a very small rural pond or tarn, and we got some reflection shots as well that we haven't included in this presentation, but these shapes were being reflected in the water. That's the first thing I noticed as I was driving by. And there happened to be a pull-in on the side of the road, and we all got out. We all got really successful shots. It doesn't matter where I am, really, whether I'm on the coast or whether I'm in the forest or whether I'm in the town. I'm always trying to make the shapes relate to each other. So the primary shapes in the picture here are the trunks and the branches of the tree that's in shadow. And like you say, they kind of relate to each other, almost like they're dancing or squabbling, maybe. That's the appeal of those shapes. And I know that I'm Captain Minimal, but sometimes you just got to embrace the chaos.
No, and it can be minimal chaos, which I would argue this is. Yes, there's a lot texturally, but really the balance of it is still very minimal for me. And I really love the separation that you've managed to get because of the conditions that you described earlier when I first asked you about it. And also this color, this beautiful green here, I think that's so important. That bit was full of green, not necessarily orange, because it just allows those 2 just to be apart from each other a little. Otherwise it might feel more meshed together. But I love it. I really love it. And I'm glad everyone else, or I hope everyone else out there loves it as much as I do. So good work.
You're allowed not to like it if you don't like that kind of picture.
No, you're definitely not allowed not to like it. That's out of order. But as we get to our final image from this evening, and then we've got a little one of what's coming up next. Thank you again, everyone, for following along. Give us just 2 or 3 more minutes of your time if you can, and including you, Ben. I've told you, I'm absolutely bonkers about this because it's right up my alley, so to speak. Ambiguity, shape, color, it's somewhere and nowhere. It's an art. It really is a piece of art. So tell me what's going on in your mind here, you nutter.
Well, this is another image from Lake Bled, and you got to understand that I go to Lake Bled a lot because that's where people want to go to shoot the architecture and all around the banks of the lake, and also the Church of the Assumption, which is exquisite every dawn and amazing every sunset. But I do have a lot of dawn and sunset shots of the architecture and the church on Lake Bled. So when I'm there, I'm usually trying to find something a bit different, and this is a reflection of some very well kept public gardens that have a variety of trees and shrubs in them next to a kind of grandstand for watching water sports on the lake. And we're there at a lovely time of day. The sun's up. I think it's probably been up for about half an hour or something, and it's illuminating these trees, and they're being reflected in the lake water of Lake Bled. And I did a number of these. It's very similar to the one I shot that you showed early on, one of the first couple in the presentation of the Church of the Assumption. It's just picking out an area of reflection that produces something interesting and produces shapes that work together. And on this occasion, there happen to be all these beautiful shrubs and trees.
Yeah, and I love the tree trunks, especially this one. It just gives us a little something to keep exploring out and coming back to. And this is just the rising sun for me, and it's very painterly, very, very painterly. I really, really enjoy this. And actually, a couple of nice comments coming in about this one's like a Monet. Well, there we go. I mean, that's not too bad, is it? Don't tell him that. And colourful chaos, yeah. But again, it's a great, Lynn, you're right. It's a great example of ordered colourful chaos, isn't it? And I think this is a great one for us to finish on. And I think, Ben, we've shown hopefully how versatile Slovenia is and location-wise. But I think it's also a great testament to how versatile you are, and how
oh, thank you.
Well, how landscape photographers really, we do well to be attentive always to seeing and reacting to when we're in different places, right? It isn't formulaic. We have to be receptive and flexible artistically to think about things, right?
Yes, yeah. Work with what you're given. There are very few occasions when you can get absolutely nothing. Obviously, if it's horizontal rain in a force 9 gale, then it's quite hard to get a decent shot. But yes, it's a question of working with what you're given at the time in the landscape.
Yeah, and I think especially shots like this is, really, you're going to come back and you'll always remember this, and it'll be your work and it will be your own view of things. And I really absolutely endorse that as much as we all can out there. So Ben, just as I bring us to a close, just for the last few seconds, thank you so much. It's always great fun to see you and talk to you. We don't do it enough, but thank you for being a good sport tonight.
A pleasure. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. For everyone who has enjoyed watching along, do let us know in the comments. We really do appreciate it. It's great for us to get some nice feedback. We are going to build on some of the things we talked about last week with the odd processing thing and whatnot, but we're a few weeks ahead in our planning, so just bear with us while we sort of leverage that in. Next week, we're going to be in Glamorgan, so in Wales on the Heritage Coast in Glamorgan, with the wonderful Verity Milligan. Verity is a fantastic photographer based up in Birmingham, but is very experienced and shoots all around the UK. And so we're going to have a fab chat with her about the Heritage Coast, an area I know a little bit about, but she knows a lot more about than me. And as you can see, it's a very dramatic coastal location, and there's some wonderful shooting opportunities there. So we'll be coming to you with that next week, Tuesday, 8 p.m. as ever. Put it in your diaries. Do not miss it. There's literally no other reason to be anywhere else. But from myself and Ben, thank you very much, and I shall see you all next week.